the oscillation that I've told you about, which is leading up to a 2-week period. So we've got 2 weeks of rising markets here in the U.S., followed by 2 weeks of falling markets as they're worried about something else. And the worry changes every 2 weeks, but nonetheless, it's on this little periodicity. That will escalate, and we think that will occur over this next month and a half, such that by the time we reach November, the ability of the Fed, in the form of the Federal Reserve Bank, which is not a bank, it's not a part of the federal government, it has no reserves, and it's this criminal cabal that prints money and then demands we pay the interest on money that they created out of paper and out of nothing. That group will become mainly irrelevant. And
irrelevant
to the economic scheme of things from November on. Now, we've had that in our language for years. We just didn't know which November.
From a logical, or if you can, from the mind, how would that happen? I mean,
their ability to create anything of value exists only in terms of confidence. If all of us one day decided that we're tired of having a national debt that goes to 7 families on the planet. Everybody says, oh, the horror of the national debt. We owe trillions in stuff. No, wait a second. Who do we owe this to?
Who do we owe to? Yeah.
Well, they'll say the Chinese. No, the Chinese are buying our bonds, but we don't owe them a national debt. The national debt is owed to the Federal Reserve cabal, the criminals that sit in this little building that is run by Bernanke, who's the current Kappa of the mafia there. And he says, I'm going to print up $5 and you owe me 5 cents in interest on this dollar I'm about to hand you. And it's a bogus scheme. You'll never be able to, in order to pay him back that 5 cents, you've got to have him print up another dollar, by the way, and give him the 5 cents out of that. And so it just goes on and on and on. And it's an energetic scheme at the same level, because by using their money in this situation, we transfer energy power to them in our energetic view of the universe. All of that's going to go away beginning this November.
Now, why would it go away?
Well, because at the moment they're at the real close to the point of not being relevant anymore, in the sense that they've got an interest rate that continues to fall, but nobody wants their product.
Right.
They've saturated the planet with dollars, and it just is without demand. There's no growth for them. Without growth, why do we need them? They'll just stop, basically.
I mean, they'll just stop printing?
Well,
that would be
well, I mean, we'll get to the point where, look at it in the sense of hyperinflation. If they keep printing money, then there's more money chasing fewer items, and pretty soon that $6 organic tomato is $30, and your cup of coffee is $20. And at that point, if it's $20 for a cup of coffee, how much will an ounce of silver be worth? And maybe you'll be dealing in subfractions of silver rather than some Federal Reserve paper note, which is an abstraction. And the markets are all manipulated 100% all the way through. So why would you invest in something knowing that it's manipulated and you're ultimately going to lose? So you'll forget about the Wall Street stuff, and you won't pay your student debt because you know that you'll never, ever make anywhere close to enough money to compensate you for the amount of debt that you owe to the Federal Reserve for your going to school. The whole system is just so rigged.
It's so interesting. And how often do we hear, Clif, and I hear it all the time and on our show with Andrew, well, what if the Chinese sell all the Treasury bonds? And Andrew says, well, so what? The Fed will just buy them. What do they care?
Yeah, they're just printing money to cover their own stuff anyway.
So they can print $1 trillion. Are you kidding me? They can do that overnight.
How many trillions have they printed and given to the banks?
Sure.
Which they're not loaning it out, and we know that they're not loaning it out deliberately, and that the whole thing exists on the flow of money, not the actual existence of money.
That's right.
Okay, because there's a difference between wealth and currency, and there's a difference between the hoarding of wealth, the creation of wealth in the form of extra calories at its basic level, and the flow of money through the system. And the people that are controlling us, the powers that be, exist by controlling the flow of things, not by any inherent
controlling
power.
The velocity of money.
And the velocity of information.
The velocity of information as well.
If they know something about the markets, 20 minutes ahead of you, they have power. If they know something about the political system 5 months ahead of you, they have power. So they know by January what laws will be passed in the Congress of that year.
Sure. And then they have that program that Goldman Sachs created that they wanted to make propriety.
Oh yeah, the front running.
Unbelievable, man.
Yeah.
Well, when your business, when you make money by making money,
which is
life is good, you know.
Well, no, it's only good as long as you get people like ourselves to give up real goods for that fake money,
for those dirty pieces of paper, you know.
Yeah.
Well, it does make an argument then, as I was talking about before, for not being in paper, gold, or silver, doesn't it?
Ooh, I wouldn't touch that. That's not an investment in gold or silver insofar as I'm concerned. That's an investment in the abstraction of paper.
And especially if things got weird and silver goes to 200. I mean, how many people are going to be fighting over that X amount of silver that you have a piece of paper for?
Correct. And then you're going to get compensated in paper dollars, which, as we've seen in the Argentina experience, when currencies collapse in a modern 21st century state, they do so fairly rapidly in about a 2-month period of time.
Yeah, and that's something that I differ with my good friend Andrew Goss on. I mean, he suggests, well, if interest rates go to 15 and gold goes to 5,000 and silver goes to 200, you can sell that. And I said, well, what are you going to do with those paper dollars then?
Right, exactly.
And he says, well, you buy treasury bonds. and so I'm sitting there thinking, now wait a minute. I mean, would you go back into trusting the government?
No,
I don't know.
No.
I really differ with Andrew on that.
Yeah, and at the point that the world won't exist that way, at the point that
you really think it'd be detrimental?
$600 silver is not a good thing for global social stability.
It wouldn't be good for anybody.
No, because it implies a world in which we've got rampaging hyperinflation on food and energy, and basic collapse of the infrastructure totally, maybe 60 to 70% unemployment.
Right.
And it gets worse from there. Closing food supplies, riots over food, the social order is disrupted. It implies a very chaotic time that very few people will wish to be in, and any who survive will say, boy, I'm glad I came through that, and I'm never going back.
Because the people listening right now, they say, well, gosh, I hope we get $600 silver. I have, 10,000 ounces in my basement. But then what would you do?
But you won't have Safeway stores, you won't have Walmart.
Yeah, what would you do with it?
Exactly.
What would you do with it?
Yeah.
I guess, is that an argument then to have silver, maybe in that junk silver that could actually, like dimes and quarters, that could actually be traded, Clif?
Yeah, that is an argument for that. It's also an argument for being, for spreading your preparations across to multiple different kinds of material goods and not just assuming you'll be able to purchase what you want.
Oh, in other words, have the whole spectrum of the food and the water, the whole thing. So you really think we're all of us listening today, we're going to experience this kind of
social upheaval,
like kind of Mad Max kind of idea?
Because
I don't like to use that
term, it won't show
that's...
up that way, and I don't like that idea of a apocalyptic version.
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
But we are indeed going to go through social disruption like no one has ever seen before, simply because of the amount of people on the planet, the current level of the state of communications, at the rate at which the awakening is occurring, and the number of centuries of control. I suspect that we'll see the collapse of the Catholic Church and the destruction of most major religions. I suspect that the Islamic religion is going to go through an upheaval and a reformation period that's been long held off by the Saudis and others that will just shake that part of the planet. And in the meantime, perhaps as much as half of the planetary populace will die as a result of the climate change over these next couple of years.
Wow, that's pretty...
But also, look what happens. I mean, instantly that the dollar collapses, 2.5 million people in the United States die because they won't be able to afford health care. Within the next month or so, that process begins with the dollar being devalued by about 30%. You reach a particular threshold, and all of a sudden, people will put off medicines even further, put themselves at risk, et cetera, et cetera. We're seeing it creep up. It won't be a specific single day where all of a sudden 2.5 million people die, but we'll be able to say, okay, in hindsight, on this day the dollar reached this level, and a year later we know that this occurred.
Well, in my limited experience this lifetime with challenging situations, Clif, I can remember in the late 90s where there was a hurricane coming through New Orleans, and I was working for a radio station down there, and it was supposedly going to be a big one, and I could not believe that there was nothing in the grocery stores.
It's scary, isn't it?
I couldn't, I never, it's like a bad movie. You walk in there like the Winn-Dixies down there, and I mean, there was a couple ding-dongs, maybe. That was it.
Right.
I mean, just really weird, man. It was like,
but we
whoa.
live in a just-in-time society, 3 days on the shelf if we're lucky, and all it takes is the change of the mind of the herd, and big things can happen very quickly.
You probably know this. I was in the food business for a while, and I was in a lot of stores, and the people think they have these big warehouses in the back of the store.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
They don't.
No, it's a place for a
exist.
truck to pull up.
Your truck pulls up, and they put it out, and they put it on the shelf.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it's done these days.
Yeah.
If there's not, if something weird gets predicted, you're not going to count on going to the food store to buy anything.
And see, that goes all the way up to the whole idea of the $600 silver. At that point, the cost of oil is such that we don't have cheap China March anymore to supply us with all of the goods. Mm-hmm. And at that point, actually, we have a whole new class of individuals working in the United States that are going to be ripping open up landfills looking for solid items that have been thrown away in the past few generations.
Ugh. Do you think at that point, Cliff, that there would be any value to any kind of paper, oil futures?
No.
What do you think, they would just default on all of those things?
I don't think it'll be meaningful. Even if they didn't default, they would pay you off in what? Paper dollars, and no one will be accepting them.
So you really truly...
Well, look, in the 1930s, people need to read history. In the 1930s, the United States was not that primitive of a country.
Right.
Okay, we were just about to go into World War II, which boosted us technologically, but still, we were not that primitive. Yet, during that Depression, it got so bad that there were counties in Ohio and Iowa. A whole county could not muster change for a $5 gold piece.
Well, wasn't that, though, because they literally stopped printing money? They just turned the spigot off intentionally.
No, that was not the case. They in fact had attempted to create inflation by the seizing of all different. They attempted to create inflation anywhere they could because deflation is a killer to the Federal Reserve, and so they actually bought up with deflationary dollars. They were buying up herds of animals and killing them off, trying to create higher prices in anything. That's why they eventually went to the seizing of gold.
No, I understand that, but there was literally a shortage of money, though. I'm sure of that.
No, okay, you're correct that there was a distribution issue, but it was more of demand than anything. Because bear in mind, they were still dealing in a fractional reserve banking system.
But they weren't creating dollars like they do today to throw at the problem.
They had a different mechanism for creating dollars. They didn't have digidollars, so it actually was a cost of production issue. But they still did have vast quantities of dollars. That was never a problem. The amount of green-colored cotton cloth that we call the dollars was never an issue. It was the demand structure that allowed it to get out and settle down to people.
Right. There was actually no body that wanted them because there wasn't work to pay somebody.
Correct. And the minute you took that dollar, you owed the 5 cents in interest on it because of the fractional reserve system.
Right.
Debt was an anathema. Now, the word anathema comes from the Catholic religion, and it means that for which you would be excommunicated. So you wouldn't want to touch the dollars, and they didn't want to deal with them because of the debt issue.
So how is it going to be different now when we got 18 trillion of these digidollars out there?
That'll go fairly quick. We'll have a cascading cross default or cascading system collapse within the electrical system that will cause a lot of these digidollars to be unreachable or immaterial in the sense that they've disappeared. So, for instance, imagine a situation where because we generate electricity through coal and oil, and the coal is dependent upon oil being there to move it by train, and if the Israelis attacked and all of a sudden oil went to $800 a barrel or $2,000 a barrel,
right,
or $20,000 a barrel,
whatever,
then the cost of electricity becomes so prohibitively high that we'll indeed have shortages, chaos, and electrical collapses in the infrastructure. So the fact that you've got $5 million in your Bank of America account is moot to you because no ATM is functioning in your area, and you don't have the oil to get to an ATM 5 states away that may be functioning and might be able to tap into Bank of America, and you're not even sure that they're going to allow you to do that because they know the electric system is down in this vast region, and therefore they're going to shutter everybody's accounts until it all becomes straightened. And so they won't be a banking holiday per se, but it might be a national electrical grid failure.